I'm Madison Wilson, 26, and last Thanksgiving changed my life forever. After earning a promotion at my design firm, I headed to my parents' suburban home hoping this time would be different. The table was set perfectly, mom's china, crystal glasses, and that suffocating air of expectation. Then, between the turkey and pumpkin pie, my father's words cut through the dinner chatter. "Let's be honest, Madison. No one in this family actually likes you." The silence that followed was deafening. Before I continue my story, let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family. Hit subscribe to hear more real stories about finding strength when the people who should love you the most let you down. To understand why my father's words shattered me so completely that night, you need to know what it was like growing up as Madison Wilson, the perpetual disappointment wedged between two golden children. My father, Richard Wilson, built his reputation as one of the most intimidating corporate lawyers in Connecticut. His corner office was plastered with degrees from Yale and Harvard Law, newspaper clippings of his biggest cases, and photographs shaking hands with judges and politicians. Success wasn't just expected in our household, it was the baseline for basic acknowledgement. My mother, Eleanor, was crowned Miss Connecticut in her youth before marrying my father and channeling her perfectionistic energy into becoming the neighborhood's most admired socialite. Her charity galas were legendary, her garden featured in regional magazines, and her appearance always immaculate, not a hair out of place or a wrinkle in sight. Then there were my siblings. James, my older brother by 3 years, followed my father's footsteps precisely, debate team captain, Yale undergraduate, and eventually Harvard Law. Every achievement was celebrated with dinner parties and toasts. Abigail, my younger sister by 2 years, was the family beauty. She combined our mother's grace with our father's sharp intelligence, graduating top of her class before securing a position at a prestigious medical school. And then there was me, Madison, the middle child who never quite fit the Wilson mold. My earliest memories involve color and shape rather than words and numbers. While James memorized state capitals and Abigail practiced piano, I would be sprawled on the floor with markers and paper, creating worlds only I could see. My parents viewed these creative tendencies as a phase to outgrow, not a talent to nurture. When I was 8, my art teacher entered my painting in a regional competition. I won first place, and the local newspaper even printed a small feature about it. The morning the article appeared, I raced downstairs with the newspaper, eager to show my parents. They were in the kitchen, but the atmosphere was electric with excitement for an entirely different reason. James made the state debate finals. My mother was saying as she poured coffee. The youngest participant in 10 years. I stood in the doorway, newspaper clutched in my small hands, as they discussed which relatives to call with the news. After several minutes, I quietly approached the table. "Mom, Dad, look." I pointed to my picture in the paper. My mother glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, dear. Did you finish your math homework for tomorrow?" That same evening, they took us all out to dinner to celebrate James's accomplishment. My art award was never mentioned. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I brought home A's, they asked why not A+. When I was selected for the advanced art program in high school, my father remarked that it was nice I had a hobby while my actual studies must be suffering. My high school graduation, where I gave a speech as the art department's outstanding student, was overshadowed by Abigail's acceptance into Princeton the same week. Princeton is an Ivy League school, my father explained to relatives at the joint celebration party. One of the best in the country. The implication that my achievements weren't worth explaining hung heavy in the air. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school when college applications loomed. I had researched art and design programs extensively and set my heart on the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most prestigious art institutions in the country. "Absolutely not," my father declared when I showed him the application. "No child of mine is wasting their education on doodling." "It's not doodling," I tried to explain, showing him the school's impressive graduate employment statistics. RISD alumni go on to. "It's not a real degree, Madison," he interrupted. "You can take art classes at Yale or Princeton as electives while pursuing something worthwhile." The argument escalated into one of the worst fights of my teenage years. Eventually, we reached a bitter compromise. I would apply to several acceptable universities with strong design programs. I was accepted into NYU's design school, respectable enough for my parents not to completely disown me, yet still a constant disappointment at family gatherings. Madison is at NYU, my mother would tell her friends with a tight smile. Studying graphic arts. She always said it like she was admitting I had a minor criminal record. College gave me my first taste of freedom. Surrounded by other creative minds who valued expression over conformity, I finally began to breathe. My professors praised my work, and for the first time, I felt seen for who I actually was rather than measured against impossible familial expectations. After graduation, I declined my parents' insistence that I return home while figuring out what to do next. Instead, I accepted an entry-level position at a small but innovative design studio in the city. The salary barely covered my portion of a shared apartment with 3 roommates, but it was mine, earned through work my family considered worthless. For 3 years, I limited my contact with my family to brief phone calls and major holidays. Each visit home was an exercise in emotional endurance. I learned to prepare answers about my career that sounded more impressive than they were, to deflect questions about my dating life, and to smile through comparisons to my siblings' latest achievements. But this Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. After years of working 60-hour weeks, taking on freelance projects to build my portfolio, and pouring every ounce of creativity into my career, I had finally received a significant promotion. Senior designer at age 26, younger than most in my field, reached that level. I had secured a major client that would bring national attention to our studio. For once, I had an achievement that even my parents couldn't dismiss. Or so I thought. The email announcing my promotion came on a crisp Monday morning in early November. After 3 years of pushing myself to the limit at Horizon Design Studio, I'd finally been recognized. Not only was I now senior designer, but I had also landed the Patterson Hotels account, a nationwide luxury hotel chain looking to completely rebrand. This would be my project to lead. We're giving you Patterson because your portfolio demonstrated exactly the fresh perspective they're looking for, my boss, Lena, had said. This could put our studio on the map nationally. The timing seemed perfect. Thanksgiving was only a few weeks away, and for once, I would have something substantial to share at the Wilson family table. Something even my father couldn't diminish with a dismissive wave. I spent that evening with my roommate Bailey, celebrating over cheap champagne in our tiny apartment. "Are you going to tell your parents?" Bailey asked, knowing my complicated family history. "Absolutely," I replied with uncharacteristic confidence. This is the kind of achievement that even they will have to acknowledge. In the days that followed, I meticulously prepared for the trip home. I splurged on a new outfit, a sophisticated burgundy sweater dress that projected professional success while still being appropriate for a family dinner. I spent an entire Saturday searching for the perfect hostess gifts, an expensive bottle of my father's favorite whiskey and a handcrafted silk scarf from a boutique my mother had once mentioned admiring. The night before my departure, anxiety crept in as I packed my bag. What if this achievement, like all the others before it, wasn't enough? I rehearsed how I would announce my promotion, practiced responses to potential dismissive comments, and reminded myself that my worth wasn't determined by their approval. My parents' house in Greenwich hadn't changed. The colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and tasteful holiday decorations looked like it belonged in a magazine. I arrived the day before Thanksgiving, hoping the extra time might allow for meaningful connection before the pressures of the holiday itself. Mother answered the door, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the fact she was in the midst of holiday preparations. "Madison, you're finally here." She air-kissed my cheeks, her signature Chanel perfume enveloping me. "We expected you an hour ago." Traffic was heavy leaving the city, I explained, though I had texted her about the delay. "The house looks beautiful." Come in, come in. Your brother and Diane arrived yesterday. Abigail and Michael will be here in the morning." She led me inside, already talking about James's recent court victory and how Abigail's medical residency was progressing, without asking a single question about my life. In the living room, James sat by the fireplace with his wife Diane, both looking like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. James had graduated top of his class from Harvard Law 3 years ago and had already made junior partner at father's firm. Diane came from a good family, mother's words, and managed their social calendar with military precision. "Hey there, Maddie," James said, using the childhood nickname he knew I'd outgrown. "Still living the bohemian life in your shoebox apartment?" "It's a perfectly nice place in Chelsea," I replied, setting down my bags. "And work is going really well. Actually, Did Mom tell you about our news?" Diane interrupted, extending her left hand to display a massive diamond upgrade to her wedding ring. "For our 3rd anniversary. James surprised me last month." "It's beautiful," I said automatically, my own news dying in my throat. Dinner that evening was a small affair, just my parents, James, Diane, and me. The conversation revolved entirely around my father's recent legal victory, James's cases, and my mother's upcoming charity gala. Each time I tried to steer the conversation toward my work, someone would interrupt with another family accomplishment. Later that evening, as I helped Mother in the kitchen, I made another attempt. "I've had some exciting developments at work recently," I began, carefully slicing vegetables for the next day's stuffing. "That's nice, dear," Mother replied distractedly. "Did you hear that Abigail's research paper was accepted for publication in the New England Journal of Medicine?" The New England Journal, Madison. Only 30% of submissions are accepted. I gripped the knife tighter. "That's great for her. I'm really. And she and Michael are trying for a baby, you know," Mother continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I could be a grandmother by next Thanksgiving." She paused, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Are you seeing anyone special yet?" "I'm focused on my career right now," I replied, the same answer I'd been giving for years. She sighed softly. "You're not getting any younger, Madison. 26 is the same age you were when you had James, I know." I finished for her, having heard this reminder countless times. As I headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom that night, I overheard my parents' voices drifting from their study. "Madison looks tired," my mother was saying. "That city life isn't doing her any favors." "Has she mentioned finding a real job yet?" my father's deeper voice replied. "This design phase has gone on quite long enough. Richard, she seems to think it is a real job." "Well, at least James and Abigail have their lives together. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, I suppose." I stood frozen in the hallway, their words settling over me like a cold blanket. Despite my preparation, despite the genuine professional success I'd achieved, nothing had changed. I was still the disappointment, the child who had strayed from the acceptable path. That night, I lay awake in my too-pink childhood bedroom, surrounded by the few academic trophies I'd managed to win and the many art pieces my parents had never bothered to frame or display. Tomorrow would be Thanksgiving proper, with Abigail and her husband Michael joining us. One more chance to make them see me, really see me, for who I was and what I had accomplished. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Mother had been up since dawn preparing the turkey, and Father was in his study handling a few work matters before the festivities. I threw myself into helping with preparations, chopping, stirring, and setting the table exactly as Mother instructed. Abigail arrived mid-morning, her entrance causing the usual stir. My younger sister had somehow inherited the best features from both our parents, our father's height and sharp cheekbones combined with our mother's delicate features and natural grace. Her husband Michael, a pediatric surgeon she'd met in medical school, followed with their luggage. "Madison." Abigail embraced me with genuine warmth that momentarily dissolved my resentment. Despite everything, Abigail and I had maintained a semblance of sisterly connection. "You look great. How's the city treating you?" Before I could answer, Mother whisked her away to discuss some critical aspect of the dinner preparation that apparently only Abigail could help with. The familiar pattern was already establishing itself, and we weren't even at the dinner table yet. By 4 o'clock, the dining room looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. Mother's finest china gleamed under the chandelier light, polished silver cutlery flanked embroidered napkins, and crystal glasses caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. The centerpiece, an elaborate arrangement of seasonal flowers and miniature pumpkins, had been delivered that morning from the florist Mother patronized for all significant occasions. I stood in the doorway, admiring her handiwork while mentally rehearsing how I would share my news. This time, I wouldn't let myself be interrupted. This time, they would have to acknowledge my success. "Madison, don't just stand there," Mother called from the kitchen. "The cranberry sauce needs to be transferred to the crystal serving dish." By the time we all took our seats, the tension in my shoulders had formed a persistent knot. Father sat at the head of the table, Mother at the foot, with James and Diane on one side, Abigail and Michael on the other. I sat alone on the side closest to Mother, the empty chair beside me a subtle reminder of my unpartnered status. "Everything looks wonderful, Eleanor," Michael said as we settled in. "Indeed," Father agreed, surveying the spread with approval. "Shall we observe our tradition before we eat?" The Wilson Thanksgiving tradition involved each person sharing something they were grateful for from the past year, along with an achievement they were proud of. It had always been a minefield for me, but this year, I was prepared. Father went first, describing a high-profile case he'd won and expressing gratitude for his continuing good health to enjoy the fruits of hard work. Mother followed, detailing the success of her spring charity gala that had raised record funds, and expressing thanks for another year with my beautiful family. James shared news of his promotion to junior partner months ahead of schedule, while Diane announced she had been appointed to the board of the Greenwich Historical Society, the youngest member in their history, she added, glancing at me as if in challenge. Abigail revealed that beyond her research publication, she had been selected to assist on a groundbreaking surgical procedure, while Michael shared that his pediatric practice had expanded to a second location. Then all eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath. This year, I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had to grow professionally. I was promoted to senior designer at Horizon last month, making me one of the youngest senior designers in New York's competitive industry. I paused, letting this sink in before continuing. I've also secured the Patterson Hotels account, a nationwide luxury brand that will bring significant recognition to our studio. It's a multi-million-dollar project that I'll be leading personally. The table was quiet for a moment. "Patterson Hotels?" James finally said. "Never heard of them." "They have locations in 15 major cities," I explained. "They're quite well known in the hospitality industry." "A hotel chain," Father mused, cutting into his turkey. "And what exactly will you be doing for them?" "Designing brochures?" The dismissal was so familiar it almost didn't sting. "Almost. I'm leading a complete rebranding effort," I clarified. "New visual identity, website redesign, environmental graphics for all properties, marketing materials." "Speaking of hotels," Mother interrupted, turning to Abigail, "didn't you and Michael stay at that lovely place in Boston last month for the medical conference?" "What was it called?" "The Ritz-Carlton," Abigail replied, shooting me an apologetic glance. "That's it," Mother nodded. "Simply exquisite. Perhaps your hotel clients could take notes from established luxury brands, Madison." I took a long sip of wine, swallowing my response along with it. Dinner progressed with conversation flowing around me rather than including me. James dominated with stories from the courtroom, Father added legal insights, and Abigail shared medical anecdotes that had Mother and Diane hanging on every word. Michael occasionally tried to include me with a question about city life, but these openings were quickly redirected. As dessert was served, Mother's picture-perfect pumpkin pie, the conversation turned to family values and legacy. "I was speaking with Judge Harrington last week," Father said, "about how raising children with the right values is the most important contribution we make to society." He looked proudly at James. "When I see James arguing in court, using the same techniques I taught him during our dinner table debates, I know our family legacy is secure." "And Abigail's compassion," Mother added. "Remember how she used to bandage her dolls? Now she's healing real people." The Wilson drive for excellence combined with genuine care. The warmth directed at my siblings was palpable, highlighting the chill in the spaces where I was mentioned, or more often, not mentioned. The Wilson family has always prioritized excellence and contribution, Father continued, raising his glass. Academic rigor, professional achievement, social responsibility. And what about creative contribution? I interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Art and design shape how people experience the world. They communicate, inspire, and solve problems in different ways. Father lowered his glass, fixing me with the penetrating stare that had intimidated opposing counsel for decades. Madison, we've humored your artistic interests since childhood, he said, his tone coolly reasonable. But at some point, one must distinguish between hobbies and genuine achievement. My work isn't a hobby, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Design is a professional field that drives billions in commerce. The Patterson account alone is worth. Money isn't the only measure of value, Mother interjected. It's about contribution to society, upholding certain standards. And you don't think my work contributes to society? I challenged. Making things look pretty is certainly nice, she replied with a tight smile. But it's hardly saving lives like Abigail or upholding justice like your father and James. That's an incredibly reductive view of what I do, I said, heat rising in my cheeks. What exactly do you contribute, Madison? Father asked, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. Beyond superficial aesthetics? Design isn't superficial, I insisted. It's about solving problems through visual communication. It affects how people interact with products, spaces, information. Yet you wonder why we find it difficult to show enthusiasm for your career choices, Father interrupted. You've always insisted on taking the path of least resistance, Madison. Art school instead of a real university, drawing pictures instead of developing substantive skills. I did go to a real university, I countered, my voice rising despite my best intentions. NYU is one of the top. Let's be honest, Father cut in, his voice slicing through mine with practiced courtroom authority. He looked around the table, then back at me with cold finality. No one in this family actually likes you, Madison. We just tolerate you out of obligation. The words hung in the air like frost. Mother's fork paused midway to her mouth. James stared intently at his plate. Abigail looked stricken, but remained silent. Diana and Michael exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one spoke. No one contradicted him. And in that silence, I heard the truth they'd been communicating my entire life. The dining room froze in a tableau of uncomfortable silence. My father's words, "No one in this family actually likes you," seemed to echo against the crown molding and bounce back, hitting me repeatedly. My face burned with humiliation, and I could feel tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. 26 years of trying to earn their approval crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. The art competitions they never attended. The school presentations where I searched the audience for faces that were absent. The graduation ceremony where they checked their watches throughout my speech. The pattern was so obvious now, so unmistakable that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. The perfectly roasted turkey and chestnut stuffing turned to ash in my mouth. Around the table, no one would meet my eyes, not even Abigail, who had always been my closest ally in the family dynamic. The silence stretched until Mother cleared her throat. "Richard, that's a bit harsh," she said weakly, without actually contradicting his statement. Father took a sip of his wine, unmoved. Sometimes harsh truths are necessary. Madison has spent years pursuing this design hobby while we've all pretended to take it seriously. Perhaps honesty will motivate her to reevaluate her choices. Something in his dismissive tone broke through my shock. I set my napkin down and looked directly at him. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've achieved success by any reasonable standard, just not by yours." And I'm finally realizing that nothing I accomplish will ever be enough because you decided long ago that I wasn't worth your pride. I stood up, legs shaking but determined to leave with dignity intact. Madison, don't be dramatic, Mother sighed. Sit down and finish your dinner. Thank you, but I've had enough, I replied, the double meaning clear in my tone. Enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving. I walked out of the dining room with measured steps, ignoring their voices behind me. Only when I reached the sanctuary of my childhood bedroom did I allow the tears to fall. I sat on the edge of my bed, still covered with the same floral comforter from high school, and let the sobs rack my body. Years of suppressed pain poured out as I hugged a pillow to muffle the sound. Between gasps, fragments of memories flashed through my mind, standing alone after an art show while classmates' parents congratulated their children, watching father beam with pride at James's debate tournaments, the look of disappointment on mother's face when I chose NYU over the schools they deemed acceptable. After 15 minutes of cathartic crying, clarity began to replace the raw pain. I couldn't stay here, in this house, pretending nothing had happened. I couldn't wake up tomorrow and pass the cranberry sauce to a father who had just declared me fundamentally unlikable in front of the entire family. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and began packing with methodical precision. The new sweater dress I'd bought specially for this dinner went in first, still smelling faintly of mother's expensive candles. The toiletries from the ensuite bathroom. The book I'd brought to read during downtime that would never happen now. A soft knock on the door interrupted my packing. I quickly wiped my eyes before calling, "Yes?" Mother entered, her expression a practiced mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Madison, you're overreacting. Your father didn't mean." "He meant exactly what he said," I interrupted, continuing to fold clothes into my suitcase. "And the fact that no one contradicted him confirms it." "We were just surprised," she protested, perching on the edge of the bed. "You know how your father gets when he feels challenged." I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "That's the problem, isn't it? Everyone tiptoes around father's feelings, but mine don't matter." "They never have." "That's not true," she insisted, though her eyes slid away from mine. "We've supported you." "How?" I demanded. "By belittling my education? By dismissing my career? By forgetting every achievement that doesn't fit your narrow definition of success?" Mother's lips thinned into a disapproving line. "This attitude is exactly why it's difficult to connect with you, Madison. You've always been so sensitive, taking everything personally." The irony of her statement, coming minutes after father had made the most personal attack possible, was almost laughable. "I'm leaving," I said simply, zipping the suitcase closed. "I'm not going to stay where I'm merely tolerated out of obligation." "Don't be ridiculous. It's Thanksgiving night. Where will you go?" "I'd rather check into a motel than spend another minute in this house." "You're being dramatic," she repeated, standing now with arms crossed. "This is exactly the emotional instability that worries us about your future." I shouldered my bag and picked up the suitcase. "What worries me about my future is continuing to seek approval from people who are constitutionally incapable of giving it to me." As I moved toward the door, she called after me, "Your father will be furious if you leave like this." I paused in the doorway. "That's the difference between us, Mother. I'm furious that it took me 26 years to realize I deserve better than this." Downstairs, the dining room conversation had resumed at a subdued volume. It halted again as I appeared with my luggage. Abigail half rose from her chair. "Maddie, don't go," she said, using the old nickname that now felt like it belonged to someone else, the Madison who still believed she could earn her family's love. "I think it's best for everyone," I replied, my voice wooden. James looked uncomfortable but remained seated. "You're overreacting." "Dad was just being Dad." "That's the problem," I said quietly. Father hadn't turned to acknowledge me. His back remained toward me, shoulders rigid in his perfectly tailored shirt. "If you walk out that door during Thanksgiving dinner," he said to the centerpiece, "don't expect an invitation for Christmas." The statement, meant to be a threat, felt almost like freedom. Goodbye, I said to the room at large. No one followed me to the front door. The November air hit my face as I stepped outside, cooling my tear-streaked cheeks. I placed my luggage in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel. Only then did I allow myself to break down again, sobbing uncontrollably in the dark driveway of my parents' house, holiday lights from neighboring homes casting colorful shadows across my dashboard. After the tears subsided, a strange calm settled over me. I started the engine and drove away from the house without looking back. 2 hours later, I checked into a roadside motel off the highway. The room was basic but clean, a far cry from the luxury of my parents' guest room, but somehow more honest. I ignored the series of text messages from Mother and Abigail, silenced my phone, and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I could see the pattern of my family dynamics with perfect clarity. The realization was both devastating and oddly liberating. The truth had always been there, thinly veiled beneath empty platitudes and backhanded compliments. Father had simply stripped away the pretense, exposing the reality I'd been trying not to see. I would never be enough for them because they had decided long ago that I wasn't what they wanted. As painful as this recognition was, it carried a seed of freedom. I didn't have to try anymore. I didn't have to measure my worth against their impossible standards. The constant striving for approval that had underscored my entire life could finally, mercifully, stop. In that anonymous motel room, surrounded by bland furnishings and generic artwork, I felt something unexpected begin to grow beneath the pain, the first tentative shoots of release. I woke the next morning in the motel room, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night crashed back into my consciousness with physical force. Father's words, "No one in this family actually likes you," replayed in a continuous loop, each repetition reopening the wound. My phone showed 7 missed calls and 12 text messages. Most were from my mother, with variations on "you're making this worse than it needs to be" and "come back so we can discuss this like adults." 2 were from Abigail, her tone more sympathetic but still urging reconciliation rather than acknowledging the fundamental truth that had been exposed. I ignored them all, checked out of the motel, and drove back to my apartment in the city. The highways were nearly empty on the morning after Thanksgiving, most people still nestled in the warmth of family homes, digesting turkey and togetherness. I felt like a ghost, passing unseen through a world that continued to function normally while my own had shattered. My roommate Bailey wasn't expected back from her family Thanksgiving until Sunday, so the apartment was dark and silent when I arrived. The contrast between this homecoming and the one I had anticipated, returning triumphantly after finally earning my family's respect, was so stark it made me laugh bitterly in the empty living room. I spent the remainder of the holiday weekend in a state of suspended animation. I moved between my bed and the couch, alternately sleeping for unnaturally long stretches and staring blankly at mindless television shows. I ignored more messages from my family and declined calls from friends asking about my Thanksgiving. The only person I responded to was Lena, my boss, who texted about a Monday morning meeting with the Patterson Hotel's team. "I'll be there," I replied, though I had no idea how I would piece myself together by Monday. On Saturday night, the crushing weight of isolation became too much. I finally called Bailey. "Madison," she answered, the sounds of her family gathering audible in the background. "Is everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Can you talk?" Bailey listened without interruption as I recounted the disastrous dinner, Father's devastating statement, and the family's silent complicity. "Oh, Maddie," she said when I finished, using the nickname that now only felt right coming from true friends. "I'm so sorry. That's absolutely awful. Do you want me to come back early?" "No, enjoy your time with your family," I insisted, though part of me desperately wanted her comforting presence. "I just needed someone to know." "Your father is wrong, you know," Bailey said firmly. "So wrong. You're incredibly likable, you're talented, funny, compassionate. Just because they can't see your value doesn't mean it isn't there." Her words were a temporary balm, but after we hung up, the dark thoughts returned with renewed intensity. What if my family saw something fundamentally unlikable in me that others missed? What if there was something inherently wrong with me that made me unworthy of their love? Sunday morning, I found myself Googling family scapegoat and toxic family dynamics. What started as idle searching soon became a desperate quest for understanding. Article after article described patterns that felt eerily familiar: the golden child versus the scapegoat, emotional neglect, conditional love based on achievement. One passage in particular stopped me cold. In dysfunctional families, the scapegoated child is often the one who threatens the family's self-image, the truth teller, the one who won't conform, the one whose authenticity challenges the family's carefully constructed facade. I sat back, stunned by the recognition. My artistic pursuits weren't just different from my family's values, they represented an implicit challenge to their worldview. My insistence on following my passion rather than their prescribed path wasn't just disappointing to them, it was threatening. The realization brought a conflicted mix of validation and deeper pain. I wasn't imagining the patterns I'd experienced throughout my life. But understanding the dynamic didn't make the rejection hurt any less. If anything, it underscored how fundamental and unchangeable the problem was. By Sunday evening, I had fallen into a depression unlike anything I'd experienced before. The apartment felt both claustrophobic and empty. I couldn't focus on books or television. Food tasted like nothing. The upcoming workweek, which should have been exciting given my new promotion and the Patterson project, felt like an insurmountable obstacle. When Bailey returned Sunday night, she took one look at me and dropped her bags in alarm. "Madison, you look terrible," she said bluntly. "Have you eaten anything? Slept?" I shrugged listlessly. "Some. It doesn't matter." She sat beside me on the couch, her expression serious. "I think you should talk to someone professional about this." "A therapist?" I almost laughed. That would confirm everything my family believes about me, that I'm oversensitive, dramatic, unstable. "No," Bailey countered firmly. "It would show that you're taking care of yourself after experiencing significant emotional trauma. What your father said, and what the rest of your family allowed, was abusive, Madison. And it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of emotional neglect." Hearing the word abusive applied to my family's situation felt both shocking and oddly validating. I'd always thought of abuse as something physical, something that left visible marks. But the invisible wounds my family had inflicted over decades had shaped me just as profoundly. "I have a friend who sees an amazing therapist," Bailey continued when I didn't respond. "Dr. Harper. She specializes in family trauma. I can get you her number." Too exhausted to argue, I nodded. The next morning, I somehow managed to shower, dress professionally, and make it to the office for the Patterson Hotel's meeting. I operated on autopilot, my voice sounding distant to my own ears as I presented concepts to the clients. Somehow, despite feeling hollowed out, I delivered a presentation that impressed both the clients and Lena. The professional mask I wore was so convincing that no one detected the emptiness behind it. After work, I called the number Bailey had given me. Dr. Harper had a cancellation the following day. The universe, it seemed, was conspiring to push me toward help, even as I felt too numb to seek it actively. Dr. Harper's office was a calm space with muted colors and soft lighting, nothing like the clinical environment I had expected. The therapist herself was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that somehow didn't feel intimidating. "Tell me what brings you here, Madison," she said after the initial paperwork was complete. The whole story spilled out in a disorganized flood, not just Thanksgiving dinner, but the years of dismissal, the constant comparisons, the subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I was less valuable than my siblings. Dr. Harper listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing me to unburden myself. "What you're describing is a classic family scapegoat dynamic," she said when I finally ran out of words. "The child who doesn't conform to the family's self-image gets assigned the role of the problem." "But why me?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. "What's wrong with me that made them choose me for that role?" "That's the most important misconception to address right away," Dr. Harper replied. Nothing is wrong with you, Madison. The scapegoat is often the healthiest family member, the one with the strongest sense of self, the one who can't or won't contort themselves to fit the family mythology. It doesn't feel like strength, I admitted. It feels like failure. That's because you've internalized their narrative, she explained. One of our goals will be to help you separate your self-perception from the role they assigned you. I left that first session feeling both drained and lighter somehow, as if naming the dynamic had slightly loosened its hold on me. We scheduled another appointment for the following week. As Thanksgiving faded into early December, the holiday decorations appearing around the city felt like a taunt. Christmas approached, bringing with it the weight of Father's parting threat, "Don't expect an invitation for Christmas." The prospect of being explicitly excluded from the family gathering should have been devastating, but instead, I found myself feeling an unexpected sense of relief mixed with the pain. The pressure was mounting from my family to move on from the Thanksgiving incident. Mother sent increasingly pointed texts about Christmas preparations and family obligations. Abigail called, her approach more sympathetic but still centered on encouraging me to make peace with Father. "He didn't mean it the way it sounded," she insisted. "You know how he gets when he's challenged." "That's exactly the problem, Abby," I replied. "Everyone excuses his behavior. No one ever holds him accountable." "But it's Christmas," she argued, as if the holiday itself was reason enough to endure further emotional damage. In my second session with Dr. Harper, I explored these pressures and my conflicted feelings about the upcoming holiday. "What do you actually want to do for Christmas?" she asked. "Not what you feel obligated to do, but what would feel healthy and positive for you." The question startled me. I had never considered Christmas as something I had choices about. It had always been an obligation, another opportunity to fall short of family expectations. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never spent Christmas away from my family." "Perhaps this is the year to discover what the holiday means to you, separate from their definition," Dr. Harper suggested. The idea settled into my mind, taking root gradually. What if I created my own Christmas tradition? What if I surrounded myself with people who genuinely enjoyed my company, rather than those who merely tolerated me? That evening, I received an email from Father. The message was brief and characteristically authoritative. "Your mother is finalizing the Christmas dinner seating arrangement. Confirm your attendance by Friday." No acknowledgement of Thanksgiving. No apology. Not even a question about whether I wanted to attend. Just the assumption that I would appear as required, regardless of how I had been treated. Something crystallized in me as I read those words. With sudden clarity, I composed a reply. "I've given this considerable thought, and I won't be attending Christmas this year." What happened at Thanksgiving made it clear that my presence is more obligation than pleasure for all concerned. Instead, I'll be spending the holiday with people who value me for who I am, not who they wish I would be. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. The response was immediate, a flurry of texts from Mother expressing disappointment and accusations of selfishness, a voicemail from Father that I deleted without listening to, and a concerned message from Abigail asking if I was still upset. I turned my phone off that night, giving myself permission not to absorb their reactions. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had set a boundary with my family based on what I needed, not what they demanded. The 3 weeks following my decision were transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. Dr. Harper and I met twice weekly, each session peeling back another layer of family conditioning that had shaped my self-perception. "The messages we receive in childhood become our internal voice," she explained during a particularly insightful session. "Your family told you that your worth was conditional on conforming to their expectations. You internalized that voice. So how do I change it?" I asked, desperate for tangible steps forward. "First, you recognize it. When you hear that critical voice telling you you're not enough, pause and ask, is this my voice, or theirs? Second, you consciously replace it with your own values and assessments. We worked on practical techniques for self-validation, exercises that felt awkward and artificial at first but gradually became more natural. I kept a journal documenting my professional accomplishments and positive feedback. I practiced responding to my inner critic with the same compassion I would offer a friend. Your family trained you to seek external validation, Dr. Harper said. Now you're learning to trust your own assessment of your worth. Outside therapy, I began reconnecting with friends I'd neglected while pursuing my family's approval. Bailey organized a small dinner party where, surrounded by people who appreciated my creativity and perspective, I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time since Thanksgiving. You seem different, my friend Zach commented as he helped me wash dishes afterward. More present somehow. I'm trying to be, I replied, surprised that the change was already visible to others. At work, my confidence in presenting ideas grew. Without the constant need to translate my creative achievements into terms my family would value, I found myself more articulate about design principles and more assertive in client meetings. Lena noticed the shift. Whatever's happening in your personal life, she remarked after I successfully navigated a challenging client presentation, it's having a positive effect on your professional presence. You're owning your expertise in a way you didn't before. One unexpected development came in the form of a message from my cousin Ryan, my father's sister's son, who had been conspicuously absent from family gatherings for the past several years. We had been close as children but had drifted apart in adulthood. Heard about what happened at Thanksgiving, his message read. Been there. Want to grab coffee sometime? Over lattes at a quiet cafe, Ryan shared his own history with the extended Wilson family. I stopped attending family events 3 years ago, he explained. Uncle Richard always compared me unfavorably to James, and my own father wasn't much better. The final straw was when Aunt Eleanor asked my girlfriend if she was really satisfied with my career as a music teacher. That sounds exactly like something she would say, I agreed, feeling a kinship with Ryan I hadn't expected. Here's what I learned, Madison, he continued, his expression earnest. Some family relationships can't be fixed. They can only be managed through strong boundaries. I still see my parents occasionally, but on my terms, in public places, for limited time periods. And does it work? I asked. It's not perfect, he admitted. But it's sustainable. I no longer leave family encounters feeling like I need to rebuild my entire sense of self. As Christmas approached, the pressure from my family intensified. Mother's texts became a combination of guilt trips, this will break your grandmother's heart, and thinly veiled threats about family inheritance matters. Father remained conspicuously silent, though Abigail reported he was deeply hurt by my decision. He would never admit it, she said during one of our increasingly strained phone calls, but he misses you. If he misses me, he could reach out directly, I pointed out. He could acknowledge what he said was wrong. You know that's not how he operates, she sighed. That's exactly the problem, Abby. Everyone works around his inability to admit fault or apologize. The conversation ended in an impasse that felt increasingly familiar. Meanwhile, I was busy creating alternative holiday plans. Bailey had invited me to join her family's Christmas celebration, and a group of friends from work was organizing a chosen family dinner for those staying in the city. For the first time, Christmas felt like an opportunity rather than an obligation. The week before Christmas, I decided to put my newfound artistic freedom into practice. I began working on a personal art piece, an installation that visualized family dynamics through interconnected panels. One panel represented the family mythology, all perfect appearances and achievement. Another showed the scapegoat's perspective, the invisible boundaries and conditional acceptance. A third depicted healing and self-reclamation. The process was cathartic, allowing me to express visually what I had been processing emotionally. As the piece took shape, my friend Zach, who managed a small gallery, stopped by my apartment to drop off a book. This is incredible, he said, examining the half-finished installation. It's so raw and honest. It's just personal therapy, I demurred. It's art, he insisted. Powerful art. We have a last-minute cancellation for January's exhibition. Would you consider showing this piece? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. My art had always been professional, client-focused design work that solved specific problems. This piece was intensely personal, a visual representation of my innermost wounds and healing. "I'll think about it," I promised. That night, I made a decision that felt both reckless and absolutely right. I would exhibit the piece, and I would invite my family to the opening. Not because I expected them to suddenly understand or approve, but because it represented my truth, what I was no longer willing to hide or diminish. Christmas itself was a revelation. I spent Christmas Eve with Bailey's family, who welcomed me with genuine warmth. Their traditions were different from the formal, appearance-focused celebrations of my childhood: more laughter, more spontaneity, more genuine connection. Christmas Day began with the chosen family brunch at my friend Tara's apartment, where everyone contributed a dish that represented their heritage or personal history. I brought homemade cranberry orange scones, deliberately reclaiming and transforming a flavor associated with painful Thanksgiving memories. Later, I video called with Ryan and his girlfriend, who were traveling in Europe. We exchanged virtual toasts and promises to meet in person when they returned. The day passed without a single message from my parents, though Abigail sent a brief "Merry Christmas" text that I acknowledged with equal brevity. Instead of the hollowness I had feared, I felt surrounded by authentic connections, relationships based on mutual appreciation rather than obligation or expectation. As December gave way to January, I poured my energy into finalizing my installation for the exhibition while simultaneously leading the Patterson Hotel's project at work. The parallel tracks, professional success and personal healing, reinforced each other in unexpected ways. Dr. Harper and I discussed my decision to invite my family to the exhibition. "Are you prepared for them not to come?" she asked. "Or for them to come and not understand or appreciate the piece?" "I think so," I replied, surprising myself with my certainty. "This isn't about winning their approval anymore. It's about being fully myself, whether they can accept that or not." I designed formal invitations for the exhibition and mailed them to my parents and siblings. The gallery showing would feature several artists exploring themes of identity and belonging, with my installation, now titled Conditional, among them. The week before the opening, I received a response from Abigail. She would come, she said, though she couldn't guarantee anyone else from the family would join her. Mother had been non-committal, and father had dismissed the invitation entirely. "He says art galleries give him a headache," Abigail reported, the familiar pattern of making excuses for him evident even in text message form. The night of the exhibition arrived, bringing with it a mixture of professional pride and personal anxiety. The gallery space transformed my installation from a personal expression into a public statement. Seeing it mounted under professional lighting, I felt simultaneously exposed and empowered. As attendees began to arrive, I was surprised to see not just Abigail, but Mother and James as well. Father was conspicuously absent, as was James's wife Diane, but the presence of 3 family members was more than I had honestly expected. "This is nice," Mother commented vaguely, looking around the gallery without making eye contact with me. "Very creative." James seemed uncomfortable but made an effort, asking questions about the installation process and commenting on the technical aspects of the lighting design, safe topics that avoided the emotional content of the piece itself. It was Abigail who engaged most directly with the actual meaning of the work. She stood before the central panel, which depicted a family dinner table with invisible barriers separating one figure from the others, for several long minutes. "This is us, isn't it?" she finally said quietly. "Yes," I acknowledged, watching her face carefully. "I never realized." She began, then stopped. "I mean, I knew things were harder for you, but I didn't understand how it felt from your perspective." It wasn't a full recognition of the family dynamics, but it was the most honest conversation we'd ever had about my experience. Later, as the gallery began to empty, Mother pulled me aside. "Your father wanted to come," she claimed, though her eyes slid away from mine as she spoke. "He's just very busy with the Hendricks case." "It's okay, Mom," I replied, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. "I didn't expect him to come." "Don't say that," she protested. "Of course he supports your hobbies." The old familiar word, hobbies, which had once held the power to diminish me, now seemed almost comically inadequate in the context of the professional gallery setting. "This isn't a hobby, Mom," I said gently. "This is my work, both professionally and personally. And it's okay if Dad doesn't understand or approve of it. I no longer need him to." Her expression flickered between confusion and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Before she could respond, Zach approached to introduce us to a local arts reporter who wanted to interview me about the installation. The family departed soon after, with awkward hugs and promises to talk soon. But something had shifted, however slightly. I had presented my truth without apology or diminishment, and they had witnessed it, even if they couldn't fully acknowledge its validity. The following week, I received an unexpected email from Mother, suggesting we meet for lunch, just the two of us. The message was tentative, almost uncertain in tone, so unlike her usual authoritative communications that I read it twice to make sure it wasn't a mistake. We met at a neutral restaurant midway between her suburban home and my city apartment. The conversation began with safe topics, the weather, mutual acquaintances, her charity work. But eventually, she broached the subject of the exhibition. "Your piece," she said hesitantly, "it made me think about some things. About how our family works." She paused, arranging her silverware with precise movements. "I've always believed we gave you children everything you needed to succeed." "You gave us everything you thought we needed," I corrected gently. "Based on what would have helped you succeed." She looked up, startled by the distinction. "I never set out to make you feel less valued," she said. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest Mother had ever come to acknowledging her role in the family dynamic. "I know," I replied, and I did know. The patterns had been unconscious, inherited from her own family, perpetuated without deliberate malice. "Your father," she began, then stopped. "Dad is who he is," I finished for her. "I don't expect him to change. But I've changed, Mom. I can't keep pretending our family dynamic is healthy or normal. I can't keep seeking approval that's always just out of reach." "What does that mean?" she asked, a note of alarm in her voice. "Are you cutting us off?" "No," I assured her. "But I am establishing boundaries. I'll attend family gatherings when I feel emotionally prepared to do so. I'll leave if the interaction becomes toxic. I won't pretend everything is fine when it isn't." She didn't look happy about these terms, but she didn't reject them outright either. By the end of lunch, we had reached a tentative understanding, not a resolution of decades of dysfunctional patterns, but a small step toward more honest communication. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Harper and I worked on preparing for a family therapy session that Mother had surprisingly agreed to attend. Father had initially refused but eventually consented to a single session, framing it as humoring us rather than acknowledging any need for change. "Set your expectations appropriately," Dr. Harper cautioned. "Family therapy isn't magic. Entrenched patterns don't transform overnight. But even small shifts can create space for healthier interactions." The family therapy session was as difficult as I'd anticipated. Father was defensive, Mother conciliatory but avoidant, and James participated minimally. Only Abigail engaged genuinely with the process, acknowledging that our family had always operated with a clear hierarchy of value based on conformity to Father's standards. No breakthrough moment occurred, no tearful group hug or dramatic reconciliation. But something subtle shifted nonetheless. The dynamics that had operated in shadows for decades had been named aloud in the presence of a neutral professional. The patterns couldn't return to complete unconsciousness. Father attended only that single session, declaring it pointless psychobabble. But Mother and Abigail continued with occasional family sessions, while I maintained my individual therapy with Dr. Harper. Gradually, tentatively, new patterns of interaction began to form. Not perfect, not always healthy, but more honest than what had come before. One year after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in my apartment preparing for a very different holiday celebration. My life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound during those 12 months. Professionally, the Patterson Hotels project had been an unqualified success, establishing both my reputation and the studio's. I'd been promoted again, this time to creative director with a small team reporting to me. My installation piece Conditional had been featured in a larger exhibition focused on family dynamics, and I had begun working on a series of related pieces exploring belonging and authenticity. Personally, the changes were even more significant. I had started dating Michael, a kind and supportive architect I'd met through a gallery event. Unlike previous relationships where I'd unconsciously sought partners who recreated my family's conditional acceptance, this relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. My friendship circle had expanded and deepened as I'd learned to trust my own worth rather than constantly seeking external validation. Weekly dinners with Bailey and other close friends had become a cherished ritual, creating the chosen family that now anchored my life alongside biological connections. The relationship with my family had evolved into something I would have once considered impossible, a limited but honest connection based on realistic expectations rather than the fantasy of perfect approval I'd chased for decades. Mother and I spoke regularly, our conversations less frequent but more genuine than the superficial check-ins of the past. She still occasionally slipped into old patterns, but now I could recognize and gently redirect rather than absorbing the implicit criticism. Abigail and I had developed a closer relationship than ever before. Our shared experience in family therapy had created a new understanding between us, and she had begun to recognize and question patterns in her own marriage that echoed our parents' dynamic. James remained distant but civil, our interactions confined mostly to necessary family events. He seemed uncomfortable with the new openness, perhaps recognizing how his role as the golden child had contributed to the dysfunctional system. Father was the least changed, still unable or unwilling to acknowledge the damage his words and attitudes had caused. But even he had adjusted somewhat to the new reality where his approval was no longer the currency that controlled family interactions. This Thanksgiving, I had made a deliberate choice, one that represented both boundary setting and bridge building. I would not attend the traditional family dinner at my parents' home. Instead, I was hosting my own celebration, inviting those who genuinely supported and valued me. Bailey would be there with her boyfriend. Ryan and his now fiancée were driving in from Boston. Several friends from work and the art community would attend. And, most significantly, I had invited Abigail and Michael, who had accepted, and Mother, who had surprised me by agreeing to come without Father. He says it's not a real Thanksgiving if it's not at the family home, she had explained during our phone call, the familiar pattern of making excuses for him still evident. But I'd like to come, if that's all right. It was more than all right. It was a symbol of how far we'd come, Mother choosing to prioritize our relationship over Father's preferences, even if just for one meal. As I arranged flowers for the centerpiece, wildflowers rather than my mother's formal arrangements, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The healing hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks and difficult moments, times when old patterns reasserted themselves and I found myself slipping into familiar roles. But the overall trajectory had been toward greater authenticity and self-acceptance. Dr. Harper had helped me understand that family dynamics aren't destiny, that it's possible to recognize patterns without being controlled by them, to acknowledge pain without being defined by it. The doorbell rang, and I welcomed my first guests, Bailey and her boyfriend, bearing wine and homemade bread. Soon the apartment filled with laughter and conversation, the atmosphere so different from the tense formality of Wilson family gatherings. When Mother arrived, I noticed her momentary discomfort with the casual setting and diverse group. But she adapted quickly, even laughing at Ryan's jokes about the family's stuffiness. "This is nice," she said quietly as we arranged food on the serving table. "Different, but nice." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her willingness to step outside her comfort zone. "Your father sends his regards," she added, though we both knew this was likely untrue. "Maybe next time." "Maybe," I agreed, without either resentment or expectation. As we gathered around my table, mismatched chairs, borrowed serving dishes, imperfect but heartfelt, I felt a sense of completion. Not because everything was resolved or because all wounds were healed, but because I had created something authentic from the broken pieces of last year's shattered expectations. When it came time to share what we were grateful for, a tradition I had chosen to maintain but transform, I spoke from the heart. I'm grateful for the journey of this past year, I said, looking around at the faces of those who had supported me through it. I'm grateful for the difficult truths that, once acknowledged, created space for genuine connection. And I'm grateful for each of you who show me every day what real family, chosen and biological, can be. Mother's eyes glistened with tears, and Abigail reached across the table to squeeze my hand. In their expressions, I saw recognition of both what had been lost and what might still be built. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be entirely. Father's words from that Thanksgiving night would always be part of my history. But they no longer defined my story or determined my worth. I had learned that family patterns, no matter how entrenched, can be recognized and resisted. That boundaries aren't walls but healthy definitions of self. That approval sought is rarely as satisfying as authenticity lived. And perhaps most importantly, that family is defined not by blood or obligation, but by genuine care and mutual respect. As the evening continued with warmth and laughter, I understood the final and most significant lesson, that we can't choose the family we're born into, but we absolutely can choose how we define family for ourselves going forward. If you've ever struggled with family expectations or felt like you didn't quite fit the mold your parents created, know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. Have you found your chosen family alongside your biological one? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be valued for exactly who they are. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most important approval you'll ever receive is your own.